The morning sun peeked over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The small town of Cedar Ridge was waking up to another quiet day. Lou's Diner, a cozy little spot nestled on the corner of Main Street, buzzed with its usual early activity. Inside, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of pancakes and sizzling bacon. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. At least most people did. At one of the corner booths sat Marcus Johnson. He was a tall man with broad shoulders that spoke of strength, though his weary eyes hinted at years of hardship. His clothes were worn but clean, patched together carefully to make them last just a little longer. Marcus had once been someone who stood tall and proud, wearing a uniform that commanded respect. But now, he was just another face among the crowd, trying to stay warm on a chilly autumn morning. Marcus wasn't always like this. Years ago, he had served his country as an army medic, deployed twice to war zones where danger lurked around every corner. He'd saved lives under fire, patched up wounded soldiers with steady hands, and brought comfort to those who thought all hope was lost. But when he returned home, life didn't turn out the way he'd imagined. Injuries sustained during his service left him unable to work full-time, and medical bills piled up faster than he could pay them off. Eventually, he lost his job, then his house, and finally his sense of belonging. That morning, Marcus had wandered into Lou's Diner not because he wanted food, he couldn't afford much, but because he craved warmth. The biting wind outside cut through his thin jacket, and the diner's inviting glow called to him like a beacon. With the few coins he had managed to scrape together, he bought himself a cup of black coffee. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him a moment of peace. As Marcus sipped his coffee, two figures walked into the diner. Their presence immediately altered the mood. Officer Daniels and Officer Grayson were familiar faces in Cedar Ridge, though not always welcomed ones. They wore their badges with pride, but their reputation preceded them. These officers weren't known for kindness or patience. Instead, they were infamous for their tough, no-nonsense approach to maintaining order. And unfortunately, their idea of order often meant targeting people like Marcus, those without homes, without power, and without voices loud enough to fight back. Daniels and Grayson scanned the room quickly, their eyes landing on Marcus almost instantly. To them, he stuck out like a sore thumb. While everyone else chatted casually or flipped through newspapers, Marcus sat silently, nursing his coffee and avoiding eye contact. That alone seemed suspicious to the officers. Without hesitation, they strode toward his booth, their boots thudding heavily against the tiled floor. "Hey, you," Officer Daniels barked, stopping beside Marcus's table. His tone was sharp, accusatory, leaving no room for politeness. "What are you doing here?" Marcus looked up, startled. For a moment, he considered ignoring the question altogether, but experience had taught him that silence only made things worse. Instead, he met the officer's gaze calmly and replied, "I'm having coffee. Is there a problem?" "A problem?" Daniels repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, there is. This isn't your kind of place." The words stung, but Marcus refused to let them show. "I paid for my drink," he said evenly. "I have as much right to be here as anyone else." Officer Grayson stepped closer, crossing his arms over his chest. "We've seen you around town before," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're always loitering, causing trouble wherever you go." "I haven't caused any trouble," Marcus countered, keeping his voice steady. "I'm just sitting here, minding my own business." But the officers weren't interested in listening. Their minds were already made up. To them, Marcus was nothing more than a nuisance, a homeless man taking up space in a world that had long since written him off. And so, rather than walk away, they doubled down, leaning in closer and speaking louder. "You know what happens to guys like you when they don't follow the rules?" Daniels growled. Before Marcus could respond, he reached out and grabbed, his arm roughly jerking him upward. "Come on, let's take a ride downtown." The sudden movement drew gasps from nearby patrons. Some turned away, pretending not to notice, while others watched nervously, unsure of what to do. Marcus stiffened, anger bubbling beneath the surface. but he knew better than to lash out. Instead, he took a deep breath and tried to reason with the officers once more. "Look," he said firmly, "I haven't done anything wrong. If you have a problem, we can talk about it. There's no need for this." His calm demeanor only seemed to irritate Daniels further. "Talking won't get us anywhere," the officer snapped. "Now come quietly, or we'll make this harder, for you." It was at that moment that Linda Harper decided she'd seen enough. A regular customer at Lou's Diner, Linda was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a knack for storytelling. By day, she juggled raising her 2 kids and working part-time as a journalist for the local newspaper. She'd been quietly observing the scene unfold, her heart sinking with each passing second. When Daniels grabbed Marcus's arm, something inside her snapped. Without thinking twice, Linda pulled out her phone and started recording. Her hands shook slightly as she captured the altercation, determined to document what was happening. She knew how these situations usually ended, with the powerful walking away unscathed and the powerless silenced forever. But today would be different. Today she vowed to stand up for what was right. As the tension in the diner continued to escalate, Linda realized she needed to do more than just record. Quietly excusing herself from her seat, she slipped outside, dialing a number she'd saved months earlier during a routine interview. On the other end of the line was Senator Evelyn Carter, a passionate advocate for veterans' rights and social justice. Linda explained the situation in hushed tones, describing Marcus's plight and the officer's behavior. Senator Carter listened intently, her voice firm and reassuring. "I'll handle this," the senator promised. "Stay safe." And with that, Linda hung up, praying that help would arrive before it was too late. Little did she, or anyone else, in the diner, know that this single call would set off a chain reaction that would change everything. The tension in Lou's Diner was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus stood his ground, though his heart pounded like a drum in his chest. Officer Daniels still had a firm grip on his arm, his fingers digging into Marcus's skin as if trying to assert dominance. The customers nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some pretending to focus on their meals while others couldn't help but steal glances at the unfolding scene. No one dared to intervene. It wasn't safe to challenge authority, especially not in Cedar Ridge. Marcus took another deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm despite the rising frustration bubbling inside him. He'd been here before, accused, judged, and dismissed without a second thought. But this time felt different. This time something inside him refused to back down. "Let go of me," Marcus said firmly, his voice low but steady. "I haven't broken any laws. I'm just sitting here drinking my coffee," Daniels sneered, tightening his hold. "We'll decide what's legal and what's not around here. You don't get to tell us how to do our jobs," Grayson chimed in, folding his arms across his chest. "Yeah, buddy, maybe you should have thought about that before deciding to squat in public places." Marcus clenched his jaw, biting back, the retort that threatened to spill out. He wanted to shout, to demand respect, to remind them that he was a human being, not some nuisance to be brushed aside. But he knew better. Raising his voice would only make things worse. Instead, he tried a different approach, hoping to appeal to whatever shred of decency they might have left. "I served this country," Marcus said quietly, meeting Daniels's gaze. "I spent years putting my life on the line for people like you. Doesn't that count for something?" For a split second there was silence. Marcus thought maybe, just maybe, he'd gotten through to them. But then Grayson laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the diner. "Oh, here we go," Grayson scoffed. "The whole 'I'm a veteran' card. Listen, pal, that doesn't mean much anymore. Times change, people move on." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words settle over him. It wasn't the first time someone had dismissed his service, but it never got easier to hear. Still, he refused to let them see how much it hurt. Instead, he squared his shoulders and spoke again, his tone firmer this time. "You can disrespect me all you want," Marcus said, his voice carrying just enough edge to command attention. "But you don't get to disrespect the uniform I wore, or the sacrifices I made. If you're going to arrest me, fine, do it. but stop pretending you're doing your job when all you're doing is bullying someone who can't fight back." The room fell silent. Even the clinking of forks against plates seemed to fade into the background. For a moment, it felt like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Daniels hesitated, his grip loosening slightly. It was clear Marcus's words had struck a nerve, even if neither officer was willing to admit it. That's when Linda stepped forward. She'd been recording the entire exchange from her seat, her phone held discreetly in front of her. Now she rose slowly, her eyes locked on the officers. Her presence alone was enough to draw their attention. "What exactly is going on here?" Linda asked, her voice calm but laced with authority. She was used to asking tough questions as a journalist, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew how to hold people accountable. Daniels turned to her, his expression hardening. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am. Go back to your breakfast." Linda didn't flinch. "Actually, it does concern me. I'm a paying customer in this diner, same as anyone else, and I'm pretty sure harassment isn't part of the menu." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some patrons nodded in agreement while others exchanged nervous glances. The officers clearly hadn't expected anyone to speak up, let alone challenge them so boldly. Grayson stepped closer to Linda, his posture defensive. "You don't know what you're talking about," Grayson snapped. "This guy has been causing problems all over town. We're just doing our job." Linda raised an eyebrow, unfazed by his tone. "Is that so? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're picking on someone who hasn't done anything wrong. Care to explain why you're manhandling him in the middle of a public place?" Daniels tightened his grip on Marcus again, as if to emphasize his point. "Lady, unless you want to join him downtown, I suggest you mind your own business." Linda crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "Funny thing about living in a free country, you're allowed to ask questions. And I'm asking, what law has this man broken? Because ordering a cup of coffee sure doesn't sound illegal to me." Her words hung in the air, daring the officers to respond. For a moment it seemed like they might ignore her and drag Marcus out anyway. But then Daniels glanced around the room, noticing the stares of the other customers. Some looked sympathetic while others appeared downright hostile. Whatever bravado the officers had started with was beginning to crack under the pressure of unwanted attention. Realizing she needed to act quickly, Linda slipped outside while keeping her phone trained on the scene. Once she was out of earshot, she dialed Senator Evelyn Carter's number again. The senator answered almost immediately, her voice sharp and focused. "Tell me everything," Carter said without preamble. Linda recounted the situation in detail, describing Marcus's military background and the officer's aggressive behavior. She emphasized the growing tension in the diner and the potential fallout if nothing was done. Carter listened intently, her tone softening slightly when Linda mentioned Marcus's service record. "This ends now," Carter said firmly. "Give me a minute." True to her word, Carter wasted no time. She placed a call directly to the Cedar Ridge police chief, bypassing bureaucratic red tape entirely. Her voice was measured but unyielding as she explained the situation, leaving no room for excuses or delays. By the time she finished speaking, the chief was already en route to the diner, determined to contain the situation before it spiraled further out of control. Back inside, the standoff continued. Marcus remained resolute, his expression unreadable, despite the storm raging inside him. The officers, sensing the tide turning against them, began to falter. Daniels finally released his grip on Marcus's arm, though he kept his stance defensive. Grayson muttered something under his breath, glaring at Linda as if blaming her for the unraveling of their authority. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, the bell above the diner's door jingled softly. Everyone turned to see the police chief walk in, flanked by 2 internal affairs investigators. His arrival sent a ripple of surprise through the room, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus allowed himself to exhale. The chief surveyed the scene, his expression grim. Without hesitation, he approached Daniels and Grayson, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Stand down," he ordered. "Both of you. Report to headquarters immediately." The officers exchanged uneasy glances but didn't argue. They straightened their uniforms and exited the diner, their earlier bravado replaced by shamefaced compliance. As they left, the chief turned to Marcus, extending a hand. "I apologize for their behavior," he said sincerely. "This isn't how we treat anyone, especially someone who has served our country. Please forgive us." Marcus stared at the offered hand for a long moment before shaking it. The gesture was small, but it carried weight. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a problem to be solved or a statistic to be ignored, but as a person worthy of respect. Linda watched the exchange with a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Her phone, still recording, captured every word. When the chief finished speaking, he addressed the rest of the diner, promising reforms and accountability within the department. The patrons applauded softly, their applause mingling with murmurs of approval. As the initial shock wore off, Marcus returned to his booth, his mind racing with emotions he couldn't yet process. Linda joined him, sliding into the seat across from him with a warm smile. "You handled that beautifully," she said softly. "Thank you for standing up for yourself." Marcus managed a faint smile, though his eyes were heavy with years of struggle. "I didn't think anyone would care," he admitted. "Not anymore." "Well, people care," Linda replied firmly. "And thanks to you, maybe things will start changing around here." Little did they know the real change was only beginning. The bell above Lou's diner door jingled softly as the police chief walked in, his presence commanding immediate attention. He wasn't a tall man, but there was something about the way he carried himself, his shoulders squared, his jaw set, that made it clear he meant business. The tension in the room shifted instantly. Customers who had been whispering nervously fell silent, their eyes darting between Marcus, the officers, and the chief. Even Daniels and Grayson seemed to shrink under his gaze. Without hesitation, the chief approached the two officers, his expression stern. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice firm but controlled. "Both of you, report to headquarters immediately." Daniels and Grayson exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of authority. They hesitated for a moment, as if hoping the chief might change his mind, but when he didn't waver, they reluctantly obeyed. Straightening their uniforms, one last attempt at preserving some semblance of dignity, they exited the diner, leaving behind an awkward silence. Once they were gone, the chief turned his attention to Marcus. For a moment he simply studied him, taking in the worn jacket, the tired eyes, and the quiet strength that radiated despite everything Marcus had endured. Then, without pretense, he extended his hand. "I apologize for their behavior," the chief said sincerely. His tone was measured, but there was no mistaking the weight behind his words. "This isn't how we treat anyone, especially someone who has served our country. Please forgive us." Marcus hesitated. The gesture caught him off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it was so rare. How many times had he faced situations like this where apologies were absent and accountability non-existent? Slowly, almost cautiously, he reached out and shook the chief's hand. The contact was brief, but it carried meaning, a small yet significant acknowledgement of humanity. For the first time in what felt like forever, Marcus allowed himself to exhale. It wasn't just relief, it was validation. Someone in power had finally listened, had finally seen him not as a problem or a stereotype, but as a person deserving of respect. Still, years of hardship had taught him not to let his guard down too easily. "Thank you," Marcus replied quickly, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But I'm not the only one this happens to. If something doesn't change, it'll happen again, to me or to someone else." The chief nodded gravely, clearly understanding the gravity of Marcus's words. "You're right," he admitted. "And that's why we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. Those officers will face consequences, and we're going to review our policies to prevent situations like this in the future." As the chief spoke, Linda watched from her seat across the table. She couldn't help but feel a swell of pride, not just for standing up to the officers earlier, but for knowing that her actions had played a part in bringing justice to Marcus. Yet she also knew this was bigger than one incident. This was about systemic issues that needed addressing, and Marcus's story could be the catalyst for change. After speaking with Marcus, The chief addressed the rest of the diner. Standing near the center of the room, he cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying over the hushed murmurs, "what happened here today is unacceptable. As your police chief, I take full responsibility for the actions of my officers. We are here to serve and protect, not to intimidate or harass. From this moment forward, we will work tirelessly to ensure that every member of this community feels safe and respected." His words were met with cautious applause, though some patrons remained skeptical. Change was easy to promise, but harder to deliver. Still, the sentiment resonated with many, including Linda, who decided then and there that she would hold them accountable. After all, promises were only as good as the actions that followed. When the chief finished speaking, he thanked Marcus once more before heading outside to deal with Daniels and Grayson. The diner buzzed with conversation as people processed what had just unfolded. Some praised Marcus for his composure, while others marveled at Linda's courage in stepping forward. A few even approached Marcus to shake his hand or offer words of encouragement. "You handled yourself with real dignity back there," one older gentleman said, patting Marcus on the shoulder. "We need more people like you in this world." Marcus managed a faint smile, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He appreciated the kind words, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was fleeting. Once the spotlight faded, life would go back to normal for everyone except him. He was still homeless, still struggling to survive day by day. An apology, however heartfelt, wouldn't fix that. Sensing his unease, Linda leaned closer. "Hey," she said gently. "You okay?" Marcus shrugged. "I guess just thinking." "About what?" she prompted. He hesitated, unsure how much to share. But something about Linda's sincerity put him at ease. "It's just, this whole thing feels surreal, you know? One minute, I'm sitting here minding my own business, and the next, the police chief is apologizing to me in front of everyone. Don't get me wrong, it's nice, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm still stuck, still trying to figure out how to move forward." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "That's fair. And honestly, I think most people understand that. Your story, it's powerful. People want to help. You've already inspired so many just by standing up for yourself today." Marcus raised an eyebrow, skepticism creeping into his expression. "Inspired them to do what? Clap for me while I sleep on park benches?" "No," Linda replied firmly. "To take action, to push for change. Look, I'm a journalist. I know how stories like yours can spark movements. With your permission, I'd like to write about what happened here today. Not just the confrontation, but everything. Your service, your struggles, your resilience. If people hear your story, they won't just sympathize, they'll act." Marcus stared at her, considering her words. Part of him wanted to dismiss the idea outright. What difference could one article make? But another part, the part that still clung to hope, wondered if maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something bigger. "What would you write about?" he asked cautiously. "Everything," Linda said earnestly. "Your military service, your injuries, the challenges you've faced since coming home. And yes, what happened here today. But more importantly, I want to highlight the strength it takes to keep going despite all that. People need to see that side of the story, the human side." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't know. Putting myself out there like that, you don't have to decide right now," Linda assured him. "Just think about it. In the meantime, I'll upload the video I recorded earlier. Maybe that'll shine a light on what really happened here." True to her word, Linda posted the footage online later that evening. Within hours, it went viral. Social media platforms lit up with reactions, ranging from outrage over the officer's behavior to admiration for Marcus's calm demeanor. News outlets picked up the story, and soon, Marcus's name was everywhere. Comment sections filled with messages of support, while hashtags like #Justice for Marcus and #Respect Our Heroes trended nationwide. But the impact didn't stop there. Veterans organizations reached out, offering resources and assistance tailored specifically to Marcus's needs. Local charities launched fundraisers to help cover his medical bills and secure stable housing. Even strangers contributed, sending donations large and small along with heartfelt notes of encouragement. One message stood out to Marcus in particular. It came from Senator Evelyn Carter herself, thanking him for his bravery and inviting him to speak at a national conference on policing reform. Reading her words, Marcus felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark that reminded him he wasn't alone. By the end of the week, Marcus found himself sitting in a modest apartment provided by a veterans charity. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Boxes of donated clothes and supplies filled the corners, sent by people who had been moved by his story. For the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a future beyond survival, a future where he could rebuild his life and give back to others facing similar struggles. As he unpacked the last box, Linda stopped by to check on him. She smiled warmly when she saw the progress he'd made. "This place suits you," she said, looking around. Marcus chuckled softly. "Yeah, well, it beats sleeping outside." They shared a laugh, the kind that comes from shared triumphs and newfound friendships. But beneath the surface, Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. And somewhere deep inside, he realized that one phone call, one brave decision by a stranger, had changed everything. The days following the incident at Lou's Diner passed in a blur for Marcus. The whirlwind of attention, from social media posts to news coverage to charity offers, was overwhelming. But it also brought something Marcus hadn't felt in years: hope. For so long, he had carried the weight of his struggles alone, believing that no one cared about what happened to people like him. But now, with strangers across the country rallying behind him, Marcus began to see glimpses of light breaking through the darkness. Daniels and Grayson, on the other hand, faced swift repercussions for their actions. Their suspension without pay was only the beginning. The internal affairs investigators assigned to the case dug deep into their records, uncovering a pattern of misconduct stretching back years. Complaints filed against them by members of the community, many of which had been ignored or brushed aside, resurfaced, painting a troubling picture of systemic bias within the department. When the findings were made public, outrage rippled through Cedar Ridge. Community leaders called for immediate reforms, demanding accountability not just from individual officers but from the entire system. Town hall meetings were organized, drawing large crowds eager to voice their concerns. At one such meeting, Marcus found himself seated alongside Linda, Senator Carter, and several local activists. It was surreal for him to be there, not as a victim seeking justice, but as a voice advocating for change. Senator Carter opened the discussion, her tone firm yet compassionate. "What happened to Marcus Johnson is unacceptable," she declared, addressing the packed auditorium. But it isn't an isolated incident. Across this nation, marginalized communities face similar injustices every single day. We must do better. That starts with holding individuals accountable, yes, but it doesn't end there. True reform requires us to examine our systems, challenge our biases, and commit to creating a safer, fairer society for everyone. Her words resonated deeply with those in attendance, including Marcus. As she spoke, he glanced around the room, taking in the faces of people who had come together to demand change. There were veterans, families, students, and elderly residents, all united by a shared desire for justice. It was humbling, and for the first time, Marcus allowed himself to believe that maybe his story could make a difference. Later in the meeting, Linda stood up to share her perspective. Holding her phone, the same device she'd used to record the altercation, she recounted the events of that morning in vivid detail. Her voice trembled slightly as she described the fear she'd felt watching Daniels and Grayson harass Marcus. But it grew stronger as she talked about the power of collective action. "I didn't think twice about stepping in," Linda said, looking directly at Marcus. "Because I knew I wasn't the only one who saw what was happening. When we stand together, when we refuse to stay silent, we can force change. This isn't just about one man. It's about all of us." Every person deserves to feel safe in their own community, regardless of where they come from or what they look like. Applause erupted throughout the room, and Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected to become a symbol of resilience, let alone a catalyst for reform. But as he listened to Linda's impassioned speech, he realized that his experience had struck a chord with others because it highlighted a universal truth. Everyone wants to belong, to be seen, to matter. After the town hall, the Cedar Ridge Police Department announced sweeping changes aimed at improving community relations. Mandatory sensitivity training became standard for all officers, along with new protocols designed to prevent profiling and harassment. A civilian oversight board was established to review complaints against law enforcement, ensuring transparency and accountability. While these measures were far from perfect, and progress would take time, they represented a significant step forward. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to adjust to his new life. With the help of veterans organizations, he secured steady employment as a peer counselor, working with other former service members struggling with homelessness and PTSD. His apartment, once filled with boxes of donated items, slowly transformed into a cozy home. Photos of friends and family adorned the walls, reminders of happier times before his struggles began. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, Marcus embraced each day with a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as he prepared dinner, in his small kitchen, Marcus received a letter in the mail. The envelope bore the seal of the U.S. Senate, and curiosity piqued. He opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note from Senator Carter, thanking him for his courage and inviting him to speak at a national conference on policing reform. The event would bring together lawmakers, activists, and community leaders from across the country, all committed to addressing systemic issues within law enforcement. Reading the invitation, Marcus felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was honored, even flattered, that someone of Senator Carter's stature believed his voice mattered. On the other hand, the thought of speaking publicly terrified him. What could he possibly say that hadn't already been said? How could he articulate the pain, frustration, and resilience he'd experienced without sounding bitter or defeated? Determined to rise to the occasion, Marcus reached out to Linda for advice. She agreed to help him craft his speech, meeting with him regularly to brainstorm ideas and rehearse. Together, they worked tirelessly, shaping his words into a powerful narrative that balanced vulnerability with strength. By the time the conference rolled around, Marcus felt as ready as he ever would be. The conference took place in Washington, D.C., and Marcus arrived feeling both nervous and excited. Stepping onto the stage for the first time, he scanned the audience, a sea of unfamiliar faces waiting expectantly. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "Good afternoon," he started, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "My name is Marcus Johnson, and I'm a veteran. For years, I served my country with pride, believing that I was fighting for freedom and equality. But when I came home, I discovered that those ideals didn't always apply to people like me. People who look different, live differently, or lack the resources to fight back." He paused, letting his words sink in. Then, he continued. "What happened to me in that diner wasn't unique. It happens every day, in cities and towns across America. People are judged not by their character but by their circumstances. They're treated as problems to be solved, rather than human beings deserving of respect. And while policies and procedures can help address these issues, true change begins with empathy, with recognizing the humanity in everyone we encounter." As Marcus spoke, the room fell silent, captivated by his honesty and conviction. He shared stories from his past, highlighting moments of struggle and triumph alike. He acknowledged the challenges he still faced but emphasized the importance of perseverance and unity. By the time he finished, the audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. In that moment, Marcus realized something profound. His story wasn't just his own anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt unseen, unheard, or undervalued. And though the journey ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, he knew he wouldn't have to walk it alone. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt truly hopeful, not just for himself but for the future of his community and beyond. The National Conference on Policing Reform marked a turning point in Marcus's life, not just because of the standing ovation he received, but because it solidified his role as an advocate for change. Walking off the stage that day, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Dozens of people approached him afterward, lawmakers, activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens, all eager to shake his hand, share their stories, or simply thank him for speaking out. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. One person who stood out among the crowd was Senator Evelyn Carter herself. She greeted Marcus with a warm smile and a firm handshake, her eyes reflecting genuine admiration. "You did great up there," she said, her voice tinged with pride. "Your words will inspire action, I'm sure of it." Marcus nodded humbly, still processing everything that had happened. "Thank you, Senator. I couldn't have done it without your support, or Linda's." Senator Carter chuckled softly. "Don't sell yourself short, you've got a gift for storytelling, Marcus. People connect with your honesty. Keep using your voice. It matters." Her encouragement stayed with him long after the conference ended. Over the next few weeks, Marcus found himself busier than ever. Invitations poured in from organizations across the country asking him to speak at events, panels, and workshops. Some focused on veterans' issues, others on homelessness or racial justice, but all shared a common goal: creating a fairer, more compassionate society. At first, Marcus hesitated, unsure if he was ready to take on such a public role. But with Linda's guidance and unwavering support, he embraced the opportunity, knowing his story could spark meaningful conversations. Back in Cedar Ridge, the community continued to rally around Marcus and the broader movement for change. The police department implemented its new policies with surprising speed, driven partly by internal pressure and partly by external scrutiny. Officers underwent sensitivity training sessions led by experts in diversity and inclusion, learning how to interact with marginalized groups respectfully and effectively. Civilian oversight committees reviewed cases of alleged misconduct, ensuring transparency and accountability. While some skeptics doubted whether these changes would last, many residents, including Marcus, remained cautiously optimistic. Linda played a pivotal role in keeping the momentum going. Her article about Marcus's ordeal became one of the most read pieces in the local paper's history, earning her recognition beyond Cedar Ridge. National news outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach and impact. More importantly, Linda used her platform to highlight other voices often overlooked in discussions about systemic inequality. She interviewed veterans struggling with PTSD, families affected by police brutality, and grassroots activists working tirelessly to build safer communities. Each story added depth and nuance to the larger narrative, reminding readers that behind every statistic was a human being with hopes, fears, and dreams. For Marcus, seeing his hometown transform gave him a renewed sense of belonging. Neighbors, who once avoided eye contact, now greeted him warmly, thanking him for shining a light on injustices they hadn't fully understood before. Local businesses offered discounts to veterans and donated supplies to shelters serving homeless individuals. Schools invited Marcus to speak to students about resilience, leadership, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within Marcus himself. As he settled into his new apartment and adjusted to his job as a peer counselor, he rediscovered parts of himself he thought were lost forever. He reconnected with old friends from his military days, sharing laughter and tears over memories both painful and joyful. He started journaling again, something he hadn't done since his early 20s, finding solace in putting pen to paper. And slowly but surely, he began to forgive. Not just the officers who had wronged him, but also himself for the years he'd spent blaming himself for circumstances beyond his control. One evening, as Marcus sat on his balcony watching the sunset, Linda stopped by unannounced. She carried 2 cups of coffee and a bag of freshly baked muffins, her usual cheerful demeanor lighting up the room. "I figured you could use some company," she said, handing him a cup. "How are you holding up?" Marcus smiled gratefully, taking a sip of the steaming brew. I'm doing okay. Better than okay, actually. Things are different now, in a good way. Linda nodded, settling into the chair beside him. Different is good. Change can be scary, but it's necessary sometimes. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the cool breeze and the distant chirping of crickets. Finally, Linda broke the quiet. You know, Marcus, I've been thinking. This whole journey, you becoming an advocate, the reforms happening in Cedar Ridge, it's proof that one person really can make a difference. Your courage inspired so many people to act, including me. Marcus looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. I don't know about that, I just did what I thought was right. And that's exactly why it worked, Linda replied. You didn't set out to be a hero. You just wanted fairness, respect, and a chance to live your life without being judged. That authenticity resonated with people. It reminded them that we're all connected, that injustice anywhere affects justice everywhere. Her words struck a chord deep within Marcus. He thought back to the countless nights he'd spent feeling invisible, wondering if anyone would ever care about his struggles. Now, here he was, surrounded by a community that not only cared, but was actively working to create a better future, for him and for others like him. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus threw himself into his work with renewed vigor. His role as a peer counselor allowed him to guide fellow veterans through their own battles with trauma, unemployment, and housing insecurity. He listened to their stories without judgment, offering advice based on his own experiences. Many of them credited him with helping them find hope when they felt hopeless, strength when they felt weak, and purpose when they felt lost. At the same time, Marcus remained committed to advocacy work. He traveled to cities across the country, sharing his story and urging lawmakers to prioritize policies supporting veterans, the homeless, and marginalized communities. He collaborated with organizations pushing for criminal justice reform, affordable health care, and improved access to mental health services. Though the road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, Marcus never lost sight of the bigger picture, building a world where no one had to endure what he had endured. By the end of the year, Cedar Ridge had undergone remarkable transformations. Crime rates dropped, trust between residents and law enforcement improved, and initiatives aimed at addressing homelessness gained traction. The diner where it all began became a symbol of resilience and unity, with customers proudly displaying flyers promoting local charities and fundraisers. Even Daniels and Grayson, though still under investigation, expressed regret for their actions during interviews with Internal Affairs, acknowledging the harm they had caused. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that true progress required patience, persistence, and collaboration. There would always be setbacks, moments when cynicism threatened to overshadow optimism. But as long as people like Linda, Senator Carter, and countless others continued to fight alongside him, Marcus believed anything was possible. One chilly winter morning, as snow dusted the rooftops of Cedar Ridge, Marcus stood outside his apartment building gazing at the horizon. The sun peeked over the hills, casting golden rays across the town he now called home. For the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace, not because his struggles were over, but because he knew he wasn't alone anymore. Together, he and his community had weathered the storm and emerged stronger on the other side. Months had passed since the incident at Lou's Diner, and life in Cedar Ridge felt almost unrecognizable. The town that once seemed indifferent to the struggles of its most vulnerable residents now buzzed with energy and purpose. Change wasn't instantaneous, it never was, but it was happening, slowly and steadily. And Marcus Johnson stood at the heart of it all, a living testament to the power of resilience and community. Marcus's days were filled with purpose now. As a peer counselor, he worked tirelessly to help other veterans navigate the challenges of reintegrating into civilian life. Each morning he'd arrive at the local Veterans Center, a modest building tucked away on the edge of town, where he spent hours listening to stories that mirrored his own. Some clients came seeking advice on finding stable housing, others needed guidance dealing with PTSD, or reconnecting with estranged family members. No matter their circumstances, Marcus approached each person with empathy and understanding, drawing from his own journey to offer practical solutions and emotional support. But his work extended far beyond counseling. Marcus had become a prominent figure in the broader movement for social justice, traveling across the country to speak at conferences, rallies, and workshops. His speeches resonated deeply with audiences because they weren't polished monologues designed to impress. They were raw, honest reflections of his experiences. He spoke about the pain of losing everything after serving his country, the frustration of being dismissed as just another homeless vet, and the transformative moment when strangers chose to stand up for him. Most importantly, he emphasized the importance of unity, reminding listeners that no one could create meaningful change alone. Back home, Cedar Ridge continued to evolve under the collective efforts of its residents. The police department's reforms gained national attention, with experts praising the town for implementing policies rooted in accountability and compassion. Officers participated in ongoing training sessions focused on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and mental health awareness. Civilian oversight committees reviewed cases transparently, ensuring that complaints were addressed fairly and promptly. While some skeptics remained cautious, many residents expressed renewed trust in law enforcement, citing tangible improvements in how officers interacted with the community. Linda Harper played an integral role in documenting these changes. Her articles not only highlighted progress but also kept pressure on leaders to maintain momentum. She interviewed Daniels and Grayson during their disciplinary hearings, capturing their remorseful reflections and holding them accountable for their actions. Though neither officer returned to active duty, both expressed regret for their behavior, acknowledging the harm they had caused. Their public apologies, while imperfect, served as reminders of the importance of personal growth, even for those in positions of authority. The diner itself became a symbol of hope and resilience. Lou, the owner, decided to dedicate a wall inside the restaurant to honor Marcus and the movement he inspired. Photos, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes from grateful patrons adorned the space, creating a vibrant mosaic of gratitude and solidarity. Customers often lingered longer than usual, sharing stories over coffee and pie, discussing ways they could contribute to the town's ongoing transformation. Even simple acts, like leaving spare change in a jar labeled Community Fund, reflected a newfound sense of responsibility among residents. For Marcus, the changes in Cedar Ridge were more than just institutional, they were deeply personal. He reconnected with old friends, rebuilt relationships strained by years of hardship, and even began exploring hobbies he hadn't touched since his youth. On weekends, he joined Linda and a group of volunteers to clean up parks and organize food drives for shelters. These activities brought him joy, not because they made headlines, but because they reminded him of the goodness people were capable of when they came together. One crisp spring morning, Marcus received a letter from Senator Evelyn Carter inviting him to attend a special ceremony in Washington, D.C. The senator had spearheaded legislation aimed at addressing systemic inequities within law enforcement, and the bill was set to be signed into law. Titled the Justice and Unity Act, it included provisions for increased funding for veteran services, expanded protections for marginalized communities, and stricter accountability measures for police departments nationwide. At the heart of the bill was Marcus's story, a reminder that real change often begins with individual courage. When Marcus arrived at the Capitol building for the signing ceremony, he was struck by the diversity of attendees: veterans, activists, lawmakers, and ordinary citizens gathered in the Grand Hall, united by a shared vision of a fairer future. As Senator Carter delivered her opening remarks, she singled out Marcus, thanking him for inspiring so many to take action. "This legislation represents more than policy reform," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "It represents hope, the belief that we can build a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. And none of this would have been possible without the bravery of individuals like Marcus Johnson, who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice." The audience erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't expected such recognition, But as he scanned the crowd, he realized something profound. His story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone fighting for a better world. After the ceremony, Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers eager to thank him for his advocacy. Among them was a young man named Jamal, a college student studying criminal justice. Jamal introduced himself nervously, explaining that he had followed Marcus's journey closely and hoped to pursue a career dedicated to reforming the system. "Your story gave me hope," Jamal admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "I want to make a difference too, but sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough, like I don't know where to start." Marcus smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "Start by believing in yourself," he said. "Change doesn't happen overnight, and it rarely happens alone. Find your passion. Surround yourself with people who lift you up and keep moving forward, even when it feels impossible. Trust me, every step counts." Jamal nodded, visibly moved by Marcus's words. They exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch as Jamal embarked on his own path toward advocacy. Returning to Cedar Ridge a few days later, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The scars of his past, both visible and invisible, remained, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of how far he'd come and how much farther he could go. Standing outside his apartment on a quiet evening, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The hardships, the victories, the moments of doubt and triumph. He thought about the diner, the officers, the chief's apology, and the countless strangers who had rallied behind him. He thought about Linda, whose courage had sparked a chain reaction of kindness and accountability. And he thought about the future, not just his own, but the future of Cedar Ridge and communities like it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the town, Marcus whispered a quiet promise to himself. This is just the beginning. And with that, he stepped inside, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing he wouldn't have to face them alone.